Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Cerebro Somata podcast. I'm the host, Naila. In today's episode, I have a conversation with Susan Schwartz. Susan is a Jungian psychoanalyst and she's been practicing for many, many years. She is also the author of several books. Her most recent book is The Absent Father Effect on Daughters. So, in today's episode, we have a conversation about her history, her academic career. We also talk about Carl Jung's concepts of synchronicity, the collective unconscious. We also talk about dreams. And last but not least, we talk about her book, The Absent Father Effect on Daughters. So I really, really hope that you enjoy this episode of the podcast. If you do, please like, subscribe, all that stuff. And yeah, I hope you enjoy. Okay, so Susan, thank you for doing this. I've really been looking forward to this. So you are a psychoanalyst, a Jungian psychoanalyst, and also an author of several books. But would you maybe just introduce a little bit about your background, like your academic background and professional work?
Yes. Well, I trained to be a Jungian analyst in Zurich and lived there for 3 years. And in addition to that, I'm a clinical psychologist with a PhD. So, and I've been doing this. This means, you could say, looking at the psyche, exploring oneself and others. That includes the world as well, relationships, inner and outer, the meaning of, if there is meaning, what we are all doing, what we're trying to find out for many years. So this has been something that has really been lifelong for me, actually.
So did you train as a clinical psychologist separately from training as a Jungian analyst?
Yes, yes.
Oh, I
First,
see.
yes. First, I trained as an analyst, and then I trained as a clinical psychologist. But I really define myself as a Jungian analyst because I appreciate the depth of exploring the psyche. Psychology oftentimes does not go into enough depth, dreams, the meaning of events, the unconscious, as much as I think it is intriguing. So that's why I define myself more as an analyst and enjoy, if that's the right word, really looking deeply at what's going on.
Yeah, because I kind of also have sort of the same view because I study psychology in a very sort of I would describe it as like a really sort of scientific oriented university. And like just in textbooks and stuff like this, I kind of noticed that the attitude towards psychoanalysis is quite, it can also be quite negative, I think, and quite like bigoted. But at the same time, I don't feel like any other school of psychology that I've sort of seen, at least so far, are really, yeah, they don't really give any attention to like the very kind of vague, parts of human consciousness, like your complexes or your dreams and stuff. So yeah, but like, so how do you kind of view, the sort of current standing of psychoanalysis in a broader framework of psychology?
Well, psychoanalysis itself is sometimes, maybe oftentimes, differentiated from Jungian analytical psychology. It's looked upon as more Freudian or Lacanian, a different emphasis. Jungian psychology tends to be associated with a different spiritual approach. I hesitate a little on that word because for me that's really not religious. It's more kind of the mystery of life. So I would say that that's in Jungian psychology, or the people who are attracted to Jungian psychology often speak about a more spiritual approach in that vaguer place that you were talking about, the non-rational. Psychoanalysis does as well, a bit with, again, a different emphasis. Psychology tends to be, at least in the United States, study of the mind, but that doesn't usually include the unconscious. And the unconscious is part of where we are, how we find ourselves, why we go certain places, why we do a million different things in the day. So I think it's a very important part of life, and it gets short shrift oftentimes in our rational world.
So, like, how did you first get introduced into Jungian psychology, and like, what was it sort of that kind of like pushed you over the edge to kind of think like, okay, I'm gonna go and study this?
Well, actually, it was a friend who took me to a lecture by a Jungian analyst who had been trained in Zurich.
Nice.
And exactly. And it hit for me. He spoke about fairy tales and myths, and I have always liked them. And I recall that there was he was talking about a fairy tale, and it had thunder and lightning in it. And outside of the building, it was thundering and lightning. And
That's
at that,
really funny that you say that, because yesterday here in Rome was like the biggest thunder and lightning storm I had ever seen in Europe. It was crazy. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I couldn't even believe I was in Europe. I was like, somebody is gonna die tonight. It was crazy. Like, I was just looking out my window, and within the space of like 3 or 4 minutes, I saw like maybe 5 or 6 like actual lines of lightning. So that's just crazy that you say that.
that as we have corresponded back and forth, you mentioned synchronicity.
Yeah, so I
Okay,
would love to hear like what is, for somebody who isn't familiar with Jungian psychology, how would you sort of describe the concept of synchronicity?
you just said it.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned my experience. You had an experience just yesterday. So there's a connection, there's a meaningful something. Wherever it will bring, we don't know. But when things come together like that, something's happening. Something is meaningful, and it's paying attention to the small and the big things that happen every day that are synchronous, and they carry meaning because this is happening and this is happening, and there's a bridge between the two. And so it unites people, it unites places, it unites conscious and unconscious. And just to complete what I was saying about the thunder and the lightning, which coincided with your experience, mine then said, just at the thunder and lightning and the fairy tale and the analyst from Zurich, I said, oh, now I know what I want to do. I'm going to be an analyst and go to Zurich.
Nice.
And that's how it happened, synchronistically.
And like I often, so when I'm sort of discussing synchronicity with my friends, I generally have two different types of responses, right? Like one type of response would be, oh my God, yeah, that stuff happens to me all the time. And like for sure, I always think things happen in this, order and all at the same time. And like there's no way it could be a coincidence. And then my more scientifically oriented friends would be like, oh, it's a coincidence. How could any of those events possibly be related? There's no physical explanation to something like that. But like, what would you say to that it has to just be a coincidence type of attitude?
Because I think it actually involves both. So one is the rational and one is the irrational, or one you could say is art and one is science. They don't have to eliminate the other. They go together, really.
Yeah.
Our world is partly night and partly sunshine, daytime,
Yeah.
sun and moon. Why should the opposites and the entire range between them not connect? And I think we're connected through events that Jung called synchronous, but many people have called synchronous, and they have meaning and they are important. And I think that the world becomes a much more depthful and valuable place when you make the connections. Why do you have to
Yeah.
define them? Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting to me to hear a professional, speak about it in this sort of, capacity. Because, for example, if you look at something like schizotypal personality disorder, or, some one of the disorders along the schizophrenic spectrum, part of the diagnosis would sort of be, yeah, people find patterns and things that don't really have meaningful patterns. So to some people would say, oh, that's like psychosis, whereas other people, it's like, no, this is like something like really meaningful that's happening here. And I find like, there's such a disparity there.
I think you're right. I would say that the disorder that you mentioned, some people have quite a serious split with reality. Anymore, we have medications which allow people to be more in reality, but that there are also people who see things quite differently. Sometimes they're called artists, sometimes they are called writers, sometimes they are musicians, sometimes they make gardens, but they are able to see the world differently. And that's threatening to some people. So they call it a disorder. I think the question is how we can work with our minds in reality, but also creatively so. So I don't want to negate the fact that some disorders are quite out of the realm and people struggle quite severely. But I think that if given the right medication, sometimes those people and other people who don't take medication just learn to honor their creativity. I say
Yeah.
just. It's not so easy because oftentimes we are taught the tree can't be colored purple. Well, but maybe it can be.
Yeah.
Maybe it can be. So I think the question of how are we going to honor what goes on inside and bring it out to others, whether they understand it or not, but that it's from oneself coming out to other people to connect. And
Yeah.
again, to honor the creative, even if it's not in a box, to honor it.
Yeah, I feel like people, are really kind of afraid of things like that because, something like that, for example, like, I don't know, the probability of me knowing that I'm going to ask you this question about why you became a Jungian analyst and you talking about a thunderstorm, and I'm still like in absolute awe of this like thunderstorm yesterday. I think a lot of people are kind of afraid to, sort of connect those two things because there's no real way to measure it, but I really kind of appreciate what Carl Jung did in his thesis. Synchronicity is like he actually teamed up with a statistician to figure out, okay, what is the statistical probability of those events, co-occurring. And I think it was like one, and I can't remember the exact number, but it was like an astronomically low probability, like one in like in a million or something like this, or 1 in 4 million, I think it was. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like perhaps people are just afraid of it because they don't really have the tools.
I agree with you. I also think that people are afraid because they don't want to trust in something that they can't really see, that they it's not doesn't seem like hard fact, but
Yeah.
it means really trusting inside yourself and really listening to yourself and knowing that you are honoring something that is rather beyond rational knowledge, but that does not take away its reality. You also mentioned about the collective unconscious. So we could ask, are synchronistic events part of what happens in the collective unconscious as a way of connecting us, as a way of connecting us
Yeah.
through the miles, through the cultures, through ways of growing up, being, living, And that collectiveness is a valuable connection. The issue of it being unconscious is also something to explore, and how we can bring in the variety of what is unconscious and the variety of what is collective as well.
Yeah, but just so just to, define what the collective unconscious is, like how would you define that to somebody who's never, heard that term before?
Well, rather difficultly, I must admit.
Yeah.
So what Jung would say is that, so this is classical Jung, if I'm interpreting it correctly, that it's the place where the archetypes or our patterns of being. So we all have similar need to eat, sleep, kind of basic move, job, love, sex, basic instincts, basic ways of being. They're all part of who we are. We all carry a collective level, and yet we all are, as I said, unconscious of others. We're unconscious of ourselves. We live both on the level of personal unconscious, like what's happened to ourselves in our life that we don't remember, and collectively, generationally, transgenerationally. I mean, it's amazing how many people dream of eras they never even lived in. And yet that's carried in the collective unconscious. So we get to have, to me, this is how it seems, we get to have our personal selves. And then we also get to have what's beyond us, if we are courageous enough to explore it. Because it really means going out of our familiar world and into, to go into the unconscious. You don't just jump into it. You don't just jump into it. You really respect it. You really know that there's information there that's really different and therefore very cool, but very different and can be very shocking, which is all right, but you want to be able to learn how to handle it. That's oftentimes why people go into analysis. They have like maybe a dream that's just beyond their world and they're shaken by it because it's energy that's coming up probably from the collective unconscious very powerfully. It's like people who had dreams before 9/11, or people who have had dreams before an election of a government official who's going to be running the country. Where did they have that dream? How did they know it was going to happen?
Yeah, I can identify with that so much. Like, oh, the list is so long. Like, just last week, there was this girl, that I had only met her one time at like a meditation retreat, and it was like a silent meditation retreat. So really, we only got to speak with each other for a few hours, and it was already a couple months ago. And then last week, we got on quite well, so we exchanged numbers and stuff, but weren't really in contact. And then last week, I had a dream about her, like that she was like suicidal and like kept trying to just kill herself, and I was just in the dream like stopping her from killing herself. And I mean, for all I knew, she was a perfectly happy person. She was doing a meditation retreat. When I saw her, she was very happy, but because the dream was so intense, I was like, I decided to just give her a message to see if she was okay. And it turns out she was like really depressed and like even having like some suicidal thoughts, and I was just like, oh my god. Like, so for me, like having like these type of experiences like for my whole life, for me it's like beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's something funky going on, and I don't need to be able to like put up, I don't know what the equivalent of like a thermometer would be to directly measure it to kind of know it's there. But I think a lot of people maybe don't have those experiences. And then when you say it to them, they're just like, dude, you're crazy,
Well, however, I think you've got you could say a barometer that can sense what is going on. Some people learn too early to repress that sense, and so they get the message, don't have it. I think it was wonderful that you listened to your dream and contacted her, because it showed her value, especially when she's in the midst of feeling miserable. A dream like that, you could look at and say, is that prophetic about her? Or is that saying something about me? So dreams they can be a both and experience. And we could also say, is that something that you were picking up in the collective? The dream was saying about you and her, your friendship, something about who you are as people. And is it something that's feeling fragile? You know, when you feel suicidal, it's like, what is this life about? And why should I continue? And it also means what should change. So it might have been a message to both, and the connection to both of what needs to change.
Yeah. And so how about like you in your own kind of personal life? What sort of, attitude do you keep with your dreams? Do you always write your dreams down? How can you tell the difference between just, I don't know, say a normal dream? I don't know if that is a thing, but or just, a kind of one that has like a deeper sort of implication somehow.
Well, you can always tell the deeper implication by the feeling. You wake up, and also even in the dream, sometimes you say to yourself, wow, this dream is really important, or there's an intense feeling around it. And like you mentioned, you think about it later in the day, or you write it down, or you don't write it down, but it haunts you. You can still feel that feeling, and it's saying, pay attention to me. So I can tell when it is like a huge dream, and I can tell when it's like, okay, this is one of the regular ones. They're all important, but some of them are saying, this is huge because either there's an event or there's something about myself that needs to be pushed to something else or opened to something. Oftentimes it's something I maybe don't want to look at. And that's why it's coming with such intensity.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's something to always value. I think there's also something about dreams which is amazing. They oftentimes have a theme that we carry through life. Similar characters, similar idea, similar structure of house. It's amazing that people have got this, and it's like it repeats, as if to say, it's still here. You haven't finished dealing with it. It's part of your life. Look at it again. So
Yeah.
the dream is trying to be helpful. I try to remember as many of them as I can.
And do you write them down like militantly?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I wish I did. I always say that I'm going to, but then I never do. I'm always.
Well, then of course they go away. That's the great thing about dreams. They're like butterflies. They're just very ethereal, and then they leave. So there's, again, if you want to remember the theme of your life and different things that are coming through it, writing the dream down really helps. It's like keeping a personal journal, and they're so insightful. They're so insightful.
Yeah, because we do spend such a large percentage of our time sleeping and dreaming, probably more time dreaming than eating, or, something similar, I guess. And then I find it, it's so kind of disappointing that in like a normal sort of, say, cognitive behavioral setting, there's no kind of emphasis on dreams whatsoever, but there are these like very bland theories. Like I can just remember one of them, although I can't remember the name. It's just a theory that dreaming, the function of dreams is essentially to prepare us for daily life, but like, in a kind of evolutionary sense, that we like go to sleep and we imagine different types of threats and things that we might encounter in life, and the dreams only sort of serve the purpose of like mental training, but for me it's quite bland compared to, okay, this has got to do with your personality, it has the theme of your life. I feel it's a much more wholesome picture, I think. And I think it's a real shame that, and what would you call it, like mainstream psychology just doesn't pay any attention to it whatsoever.
I think also we could broaden that to say the mainstream world doesn't pay attention to the
Yeah.
unconscious or to the life of dreams. So oftentimes the behavioral approach is let's just change this action. We won't ever find out what's really going on inside of you, who you really are, and how you are individually yourself, not like every cookie cutter else person. The do we really want to become like every other person and all eat the same thing? I would hope not. And our dreams help give us our individuality. They also are great for problem solving or working out anxiety or helping with depression because they help us understand what's going on.
How would you recommend to kind of cultivate your dreams? Like, how do you do it?
A lot of people um, don't have the experience of cultivating their dreams. You're absolutely right. So I always say, and it's so easy, tell yourself in your own sentence, I'm going to remember my dreams, or it's okay, or the door is open, whatever you want to say. But be patient and repeat that quite a few days, and they will start to come. And record the images, the colors, the fragments, the average dream, because a lot of people say, oh, I had a dream, but it wasn't very long. Not a dream. No, it's a dream. Even a word is a dream. Even a flash of color is a dream.
Yeah.
So, yeah, because it comes for reasons. And that is the other thing. Dreams always come at a certain time for a certain reason. And I always say, why do you think you dreamt that dream now? What does it mean to you now?
Yeah.
Because there's something about why we have this dream at age 10 and why it repeats later, or why at age whatever we have that dream. Why now?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So with like your kind of analysis of dreams, like I guess when you're working with your patients and stuff, if they kind of tell you a dream, do you kind of let them come to the conclusion of what it means, or in sort of the framework of Jungian psychology, is the symbology or symbolism of dreams, is it like universal and objective, or is it always, subjective per person?
Well, let's say it's both. Because when you have a dream, so when someone comes with a dream, I always ask, what does it mean to you? Why did you have it now? How'd you feel in the dream? And how'd you feel when you woke up? And how do you feel that you're saying it now? Because when you talk about the dream, it also has importance.
Yeah.
So when people will bring a dream, this is an old dream, well, that's okay because some parts of it apply now. As far as the symbolism goes, symbols are general. You can look up on the internet, what does this symbol mean? You'll see bunches of meanings. The question is, what does it mean to you?
Yeah.
So you can look up all the symbols and you will find a few that will only apply to you. And those are the ones that are coming through the dream. So there's how the symbolism is both collective, but also very personal.
Yeah. So what would be like the sort of key, I don't know, I'm not really familiar with them myself, although I think maybe there are differences between like, say Freud's interpretation of dreams and how Jung would approach it. Is there a difference there?
Well, because I'm not schooled enough in Freudian psychoanalysis, I would have to say, yeah, I don't really know enough on that. However, how it is usually interpreted is that Jung expanded the symbolism to not just be sexual, but to be more libido, which means life force or energy. And the interpretation of the dream by anyone who's interpreting with somebody, it's an interpretation with, should leave room for what does it mean to that person. So whatever the background is of Freudian, Jungian, whatever, ideally and actually really, it should be what the person feels, because the process of analysis is to find yourself. You don't want to mimic somebody else. You want to find your personal value and your personal meaning. So I feel, and I try myself not to be hooked into a certain, this would be Jungian, but really, what is it to you?
Yeah. That kind of makes me think of like, I think one of the sort of most common criticisms about psychoanalysis is that, a single patient maybe could go to see two different psychoanalysts, but
Yes.
come out of both therapy sessions at a different conclusion. Like,
Yes.
how do you interpret that? And
I think it's probably true, because in every interaction, there is an unconscious level that is going on. And the unconscious of the analyst, the unconscious of the person is going to meet. Sometimes it's a difficult meeting. Sometimes it's fraught with negativity. Sometimes it's to be worked out. Sometimes it's a super absolute good connection. But there always are things to work out, and they're happening on the unconscious. Why does somebody go to one person and not to another? They're looking for something. So
true.
they're looking for a certain part of themselves that's going to be reflected in whoever they work with. So someone would choose to work with this analyst because of what they are needing, whether they're conscious of it or not. And again, it's trusting in the deeper layers of the psyche that sometimes we're not really aware of. But I always know that people land up in my office for a reason, and they land up in somebody else's office equally for a good reason.
So, for example, if somebody was just to kind of walk into your office today, how
Yes.
does your sort of process of psychoanalytic therapy work? Like, what are you kind of like, what are the first things you're starting to notice about a person, and what's like the end goal of therapy?
All right. So I will give you an example of somebody who just walked into my office. Because of COVID, they're not exactly walking in yet, hopefully next year, but not yet. So we walk in through the computer now. And so my question as I usually begin, is why did you contact me? What are you looking for? Not what are you looking for in me, but what are you looking for? And I also do not ask, what is your goal? Because the goal, I think, is something that evolves. I don't have a goal. My goal or my agenda is to find with that person what are the obstacles. You mentioned complexes earlier. What's getting in the way of them being able to live as openly and freely as they want to? And I oftentimes will ask, have you been in therapy before? And why are you coming now? What is going on in your life now? And did you have a dream between when you contacted me and between when we have met? Or did you have a dream that you would like to bring up? So I begin in that way. I also ask a little bit of where are you from, where do you live, kind of the outer things, what feels disturbing. It's just a surface, like a brush stroke is the one brush stroke is the beginning. And then more happen as we go along.
And would you also kind of like diagnose and or treat people with like, pathologies, for example, I don't know, OCD or personality disorders or stuff like this?
Well, for myself, yes, but I don't really diagnose people like that. I always try to see the whole person. And if there are traits that are OCD, I will say, are you OCD? I mean, I want to name things and to be upfront about things, not to pathologize, but why do you need to do that? Why do you have to count steps? What is going on inside? Are you anxious? Are you worried? When did it begin? But I don't put people in the pathological box. I feel that it's limiting to the personality. I also think it's limiting to the conscious and the unconscious world. You can't get into what the matter is if you slap a diagnosis on it and then
Yeah.
go there. It's too narrow, and
Yeah.
I want it to be broader and bigger.
Yeah, I would agree. I also, yeah, I find it kind of, quite a pity that like if somebody has, I don't know, OCD or some type of compulsive disorder, some different type of anxiety disorder, that like if they go to something like cognitive behavioral therapy, is like mostly focused on, all right, just learn how to manage your behaviors and your emotions so that you're more acceptable, both to yourself and like as part of society. It's like, it feels like, yeah, it's like it's almost like training for situations so that you can like, like, oh, how would you react in this situation so you can manage it better the next time. But it's more, yeah, it just seems like very, very surface level in my opinion. And it's not like, okay, why did you start doing this? Or like, where does this come from? And like, is there another way of making you relinquish yourself of these kind of compulsions other than just like training you how not to do it?
Yes, but I think we also have to be, I agree with you, but I think we have to be quite careful of who are we trying to train people into? Robots? Do we want them all to look the same, act the same, be the same? The thing that actually I like about Jungian psychology is Jung called it the process of individuation. So for me, I think this is the process of being one's individual self, not to fit in, not to fit in, and not to be like everybody, but to be honorably oneself. And if you know yourself, you have a better chance of treating other people better as well. And just really a process, not to being some individual away from the world, but being an individual with respect to the world, who can trust the world and share with the world. And my I feel quite similarly to you about behavioral work. I think that the real issues just go into hiding, they go into the unconscious, they come out in another way.
Yeah.
They'll come out they come out someplace else. Or maybe the behavioral works for a while, and then that person will say, you know what, I need deeper work. So I've had that experience where people have said, I've been in behavioral and I felt better, but I know that I didn't get to the real issues. So then
Yeah.
they decide to do that.
Like I definitely don't want to, shit on cognitive behavioral therapy because I know that it can really help some people.
Yes.
But yeah, so I've also, heard people say that it really helped them just if they were going through, a particularly difficult time, but I also know people who are like really, really angry with this. Like, why are you not like helping me deal with my trauma? You're only telling me how I should behave and trying to, you know, yeah, get me to sort of mentally simulate situations or, you know, practice. And it's like it's just like putting a band-aid on the wound, and like really should be looking at the source of the problem and dealing with it there.
Yes, I think you're right. I would say also that when you mention the word trauma, trauma oftentimes comes interpersonally or intersubjectively or one culture to another, so that people feel the trauma. So it's not something to really manage, it's something to re-experience and repair through a relationship. And that to me is what deeper work is about. It's repairing the wounds that go very deep. Sometimes those wounds are also transgenerational. So these generations didn't deal with it. So it's up to us to deal with it.
Yeah.
And yeah, and sometimes we don't even know what we are carrying, but we are carrying the generations. And they're also, it's a possibility that if we change, here's the collective unconscious, something moves in the collective unconscious for future generations. That doesn't mean having children or not. That's a something in the energy field of being a person perhaps has healed, and the traumatic experiences have shifted. It doesn't mean that the scars or the pain is completely gone, but the energy and the trauma has shifted to feeling good about oneself, feeling solid and strong and capable. And that happens in the relationship of analysis. So they
Yeah.
call it transference and countertransference. But to me, it's like really what happens between us that's going to change us forever. Jung talks about this a great deal. It's very important.
Yeah. And so how do you kind of approach that? Like if somebody has some kind of underlying trauma and they're, you know, trying to get over it, like what would be the sort of method or technique that you would use to help people to overcome it?
Well, I don't really use a method or a technique. It's very curious when you read the entire collected works of Jung. There were 20 of them. He never said do it this way or that way.
Hmm.
So that was Jung. For myself, I don't really have a technique or a specific do this with trauma. It is more, what is your relationships? What is your world? What are your dreams? What are you bringing today to talk about? And they will oftentimes bring up there was a traumatic experience, or maybe it wasn't just one. Usually there were many. So one gets discussed, then the next one comes up. And again, the point is not to take away the fact that it hurt, but to understand what happened, how one was wounded, and how one continues on, so that the wound doesn't become something that's always completely destroying oneself, but it becomes a place that you can go to and not be so scared. And
So do you think like just the very kind of act of sort of, you know, getting people to talk about it and analyze it from, you know, various perspectives kind of helps them to, you know, familiarize themselves with it, and like that sort of helps them to overcome it?
I think it also helps because the trauma will come in the dreams, and the trauma will be reenacted in the analytic work because oftentimes it was relational. So I really address with the person, you know, so and so who hurt you, They might have come through the door, metaphorically.
Yeah.
They might also be here. They might be telling us information about you. It might say, where did your development stop? What wants to come forward now? So it's to use it in a way to heal, not to use it um, to say, oh, well, you're completely destroyed because of it, or to put someone in a victim box. No, it's to make sense of it, to find meaning, to find healthy symbols. Again, not to negate it all, because trauma is trauma, on with it. I think that's the issue, to go on with the trauma.
Yeah. And I don't know if you're like allowed to talk about this, but what would be like one of the sort of biggest sort of transformations that you've seen in people that you've worked with?
Well, I have quite a few, but I'll give you an example of one who gave me permission. This person also appears in my book, The Absent Father Effect on Daughters. So again, it's with permission. And this is someone who came to me quite a long time ago in a very difficult relationship, but had been married quite a few years earlier. And in the work over a long time, there became change in relationships, change in confidence of oneself. I won't say it's easy, many ups and downs, bouts of quite severe depression, coming out of it, body issues, weight gain, weight loss. And then there came a time when this person returned to the first marriage, re-met that person, re-met them. It's amazing. Re-met them, and they started to connect with each other. And after so many years, I believe it was maybe 30 years.
Wow.
It was a long time. So they had both made their own journey. They've both made quite a bit of transformations and realized that they both really loved each other. And they came back together. They actually got married. They have developed a life together. But more than that, this person became more confident, realized what was really important in life, and no longer was dealing with negative relationships, bad relationships, and the severe depressions did not occur anymore. And the sense of peace, and I'm living not a flashy life, I'm living a good life, is what they said. And what more can you ask but to live life? And with awareness. So it's still with the remembrance of one's inner life, paying attention to the synchronicities, all of the things that we've talked about. This person did as well and continued doing, but finally found a space that had not been there even from childhood, of peace, acceptance, contentment, and creativity. It was quite profound. It's very moving.
So how long have you been practicing as a Jungian analyst again?
Probably about 30, 35 years as an analyst, and before then as a therapist. So I've been doing this for a very long time, since my early 20s.
Wow.
So what's happened is, with myself and with what I do with people, is I kept on getting degrees, but more than that, kept on going deeper and deeper and deeper. And I hope that I keep on being open to go even deeper.
Yeah. So yeah, and you mentioned that lady from your book, so the absent father effect. I thought it was very, very well written, and also yeah, very, very deep. But yeah, I was just wondering if maybe you could just explain the sort of background of it, and like what was it that kind of first inspired you to write about this particular topic?
Well, what inspired me, and this is part of the background of it as well, is the amount of people who come to see me when I ask them about their fathers. So it's true about absent fathers with sons, but I limited it to the daughters because it's quite profound the amount of women. First of all, it used to be more, but the higher percentage of people who seek therapy and analysis are women. It was from the beginning with Freud as well. Most of the patients, quite a few of them were women. So I don't know if because women are more or learn to be introspective, they learn to be emotional, they get trained culturally to manage, hold, contain, look at, reflect. So there they come into the offices. And these women, when I ask, how was your father? Well, he wasn't there. Or if he was there, he was alcoholic. Or he was drugs. Or he was emotionally tyrannical. Or he was not very good to the partner, his partner. But also, in many ways, he was absent. And the next question, of course, I say, did he come to your games? Did he watch your sports? Did he watch your activities? No. Was he there? No. Well, I played with him when I was little. Okay, then what happened? Well, usually she gets to puberty. This is classic, and he can't manage his emotions or his feelings on seeing his little girl become a woman. And he hasn't done his inner work or understood himself because he probably didn't have a father who was present either. And his father was probably not present because the idea was that all you had to do was be a provider, not emotional. You don't have to be present. Mother or the other partner will take care of it. And it's just lopsided. So I noticed a pattern that was happening, that there was no father. And as I looked in the literature, in the psychological literature, it's only been written about in the last 20, 25 years, very little. And Jung himself had one essay on the father, even though he talked about the father symbolically, one essay on the father, and he had 4 daughters. And he hardly mentioned that. I mean, his work was, you could say, in a wider way, but that also might be an excuse.
It sort of sounds like you don't believe that anybody has a good father, though. Like, is that the case, or like a little bit, or do you think maybe?
Well, I was quite clear in the book on saying that, and I did it purposely, on saying that this is rather one-sided, and it is on the betrayal of the father, and it is on the father loss, and it is on the absence that has been created. And the leaving all the absence means that we have a chance to fill it. So I do agree with you. It's oftentimes on a dimmer side, the shadow father. I don't give examples of the good father, but I must say that some fathers have written to me and said, you know, I can see myself in the absence and the betrayal, and I could see it very clearly. And I think sometimes having extremes and admitting that it's an extreme allows us to see what we have really put up with, how fathers also have not had a chance to be themselves. They've missed out on being there with their daughters, and they've betrayed themselves on not learning how to be present. But that's also culturally as well. Each culture, in different ways, has, maybe they don't all have absent fathers, but quite a few do. So I wanted to make a point. So it was very much put on, there weren't good fathers in the book. No. And do people have good fathers? Yes, they do. They have good fathers. And there are also many men who are trying to be good fathers. They are not just helping out their partner with the kids, but they are present. They know what to do. And they are being related. They are being present. They're learning.
Yeah, I feel like maybe it's something that would be getting better like nowadays, but yeah, historically perhaps. Yeah, it's like also thinking like, because you kind of talk about the sort of symbol of a father and like, the role of a father to be like a provider, and should also be, ideally, wise enough and knowledgeable enough to be able to guide their children in a way that kind of supports them developmentally. But then I was just like thinking like anybody can be a father, it's like, oh wait, fathers are actually just men, and men are just people, and some people are bad and some people are good, and some people are morally sound and some people are morally depraved. And it's like, it's kind of like a pick and mix. Is like, the probability of you getting like somebody who really meets the father figure of like being a provider, wise, knowledgeable, it's like, where do you even find people like that, like usually? So I think it must be quite tough for men to kind of have to live up to that, symbolic standard sometimes also.
Um, I think it's hard for everybody because the symbolic standard of the woman or the mother is also very high. She's
Yeah.
always nurturing, she's always understanding, she's always loving. It's not really human. So I think all those traits that have been kind of stereotypically, or this is the archetypal father and this is the archetypal mother, we want to be able to have them imperfectly, but to have them and to promote them. I don't think even now, it is a question. Although it's gotten better, is it still really good enough? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think we're perhaps in a transition from one way to another, or we could say of sharing or of understanding or of broadening our definitions and making them more applicable to our era, which of course will cause more self-knowledge, more looking at things. It will benefit all of us.
With the father-daughter relationship, do you feel like it's something that the developmental support stops at puberty? Because like at that point in a girl's life, they become sort of so different than the father, and kind of like alien to them, that they don't really know how to manage it, or like, or do you just think it's something that culturally that they've just been trained to not really take a huge like emotionally sort of supportive role in their daughter's life?
I think it's both. And I also think that the the time of puberty actually accents everything that's been going on before. So many things that were unconscious earlier come out at puberty, both for the daughter and the father. It also depends on how the father is in the mothering parent's mind. How, so in other words, how the mothering parent views the fathering parent. So if she looks down on him, or she won't let him or doesn't trust him with the daughter, then that gives the daughter a message about the father. So it's very complex.
Yeah.
on what is going on. The other thing is that puberty is a time of change, body, psyche, all kinds of things are changing. I think that some daughters actually get through the whole thing and into adulthood thinking their father was fine. He was all right. And it takes even quite a bit longer to realize where the holes were, where the problems were, because a lot of daughters learn to idealize the father from what he
Yeah.
requires positionally, culturally, and what she learns to do. And so it takes a long time to unpeel the issues because, it doesn't feel very good to realize that who you thought he was, he isn't and wasn't. It doesn't feel good. And yet,
Yeah.
the reality breaks the idealization and allows her to become really much more of herself.
So, like, with the kind of absent father effect in women, what are the different kind of like manifestations that you see in women that like as a result of this kind of absent father or a negative father effect?
So, several of the things that I brought out in the book, one relates to one's body. So, how the daughter is sexually, how she is also physically in relation to herself, how she takes care of herself, why she does, and also I speak about illness in the book as well, autoimmune specifically. And by that, and the reason I did that is that autoimmune is the cells turning against oneself. And when there has been an absence of a father figure, there is more of a tendency for the daughter to turn against herself because she hasn't had the support of the father. Automatically, when you haven't had a supportive parent, the child takes it as, what did I do wrong? And so all the cells kind of turn against. They eat up each other. It also has an effect, so that's on the body. Also has an effect relationally. How close, how much intimacy, how much trust can be developed in relationships. Are they chaotic? Are they solid? Is there trust? So it affects relationship to others. Also very much affects relationship to oneself. Anxious, depressed, worried, confident, not confident, affects that
But
also.
like, don't you think that, perhaps there, like, if a woman, I don't know, like you mentioned, sexuality, for example, maybe that can sort of manifest as either hypersexuality or being like sexually impotent. Don't you think like that there also could be other reasons that like that it doesn't always, relate back to the father?
Totally. Yes, you're absolutely right. There's always many reasons. The reason that I focused on the father is that the father has had an effect and it never is talked about.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say never. It hasn't been talked about enough. So, are there other situations? Absolutely. That cause this and this and this. The father is one of them. His
Yeah.
presence, his absence. By absence, I also mean, he could be physically there, but he's absent emotionally.
Yeah.
But I do think we want to remember that many things can cause many things. So
Yeah. So
this
you're
is like,
not just like blaming fathers for everything, but in your work you
no,
mostly kind of focus on, okay, well, the father has had some effect. So what is that effect and what has that effect been on you?
exactly.
Yeah.
And the reason I also say that is that the father should have appropriate influence, not too much, and not too little, whatever that means. But if we gave over to the father and say, oh, you caused all these problems, that would be psychologically narrow. And
Yeah.
it wouldn't be fair to anybody. So it's much more to expand what hasn't even been looked at enough. Let me put it that way. What hasn't been looked at enough. And to
Yeah.
find some meaning, to find meaning in it and reason. And so where do we go from here? I mean, I think that's the other point. Where do we go from here? Because there is also another piece that relates to Jungian psychology as well. And that is that the images that we carry inside, are we born with them? Do we pick them up from the culture? But we have images of what a father is. And then how are we going to manifest it? So we all get to develop good fathering, whatever that means to each of us. Care, concern, nurturance, love, support, guidance, wisdom, protection. How are we going to develop that inside of ourselves? That's our opportunity out of the absence, is to make something from it.
Yeah. You say it in your book that like the father and mother figure, they both like parental images, like, kind of help to form the continuum of like masculinity to femininity in your book. And like how, the absence of a father, whether the father was present or the father was absent, even if he was absent, that space is still kind of, well, I don't know if that's a good word, but the space is still kind of consumed by absence. And
Yes.
like how like women can, instead of having this attachment to their father, rather they have the attachment to the actual absence, and how like to the kind of abyss. And so in that situation, how would somebody go about like getting over that, or even like beginning to address, oh, I'm like attached to this abyss inside myself where my father should have been? Like where does the kind of treatment begin with that, and how do people deal with it?
Well, I think most people wouldn't go, I realize I have an abyss inside.
Yeah,
How it would really come out is maybe I eat too much, or I drink too much,
uh-huh.
or too little, or I feel empty inside. It doesn't make any difference what I do. I don't feel real, is another thing. I don't feel real. And so that would be the reason to come into analytical work, to try to figure out what's going on. So it's more of an emotional, amorphous abyss that isn't really said like that, but it symptomatically is bothering the person. And so then there becomes the internal exploration. What did you get and what did you not get? What do you need? And then would come the where was father? Was he present? What did you learn about him? And how has he affected how you treat yourself? So if he wasn't there, if he was a mean guy, tyrannical, brutal, alcoholic, I don't know, whatever, what does that mean for you? And what does that mean for you now? And so looking at it helps fill the abyss and the emptiness. It creates, because we have inside of us a lot of energy. From that energy, I think we can create what we need. We can't do it alone usually. It's too much. So we get help to be able to create good figures inside of ourselves who help us get through life. So that what I spoke about, that is absence, really is absence to explore, comes out symptomatically to be explored. And it's like a headache. It gets worse if you don't do it. So it'll just get more painful until you do pay attention to it. It's also, let me say also, it's natural. So in the book I speak about archetype, I speak of fairy tales, because, and the stories, mythologies, because these are all ways that they're true paths of how a woman finds herself. In every fairy tale, the father always goes away after about the first paragraph at the most. And then she's on her own. Okay, well, she's on her own. She learns to make it through, she learns to get to the end, and she gains strength. It's a psychological journey.
Yeah. You also like, because when I was reading it, I kind of started to like, you have some characters of like people who you treated and their sort of their personality and stuff, and I started to just kind of like think about people I know, and like one of the sort of archetypal sort of manifestations of like the absent father effect you talk about is people who become like really career driven and sort of perfection oriented, and then there's also like, you know, the ultra sort of dependent character. And then you also mentioned something about people being stuck or preserved in like a childlike manner.
Mhm.
And I started to think about like baby talking, you know, like when people like baby talk in relationships. Do you know
Yes,
what I mean?
yes, I do.
What do you think about that?
Well, I'm going to make several comments. One is that it always makes me personally uncomfortable,
Right.
baby talk, because I think, why are you talking like that? And I
Yeah.
don't even know that I would talk to a baby with baby talk.
Right.
Why are you going to change here? And what does it say? Have you reduced yourselves to children or to, but children don't even talk like that. So, I mean,
Yeah.
where did you get this from? The other thing that you also mentioned is it's almost like the arrested development, daddy's girl, the daddy's girl or the puella. Well, she stays too young because she doesn't trust herself. She doesn't know that she's strong. She's going to be this seductive sweetie to the male or to whomever. But is she going to really be who she is? The daddy's girl is trapped, actually. And
Yeah.
she has to always be too young. And then she has to try to be perfect. So you see what you said, they all fit together, the perfection, the striving, because you can't ever do it. So you're always,
Yeah.
in a way, not, it's almost like you try to be, the more perfect you try to be, the less you can do it, because that's not supposed to be the goal.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear you sort of talk about it like so negatively, because I remember being kind of curious about it before and I looked it up. Um, there was like a theory about it that's like, oh, when people baby talk to each other in relationships, it shows like that they have like a sort of high level of security in their relationships with each other, and that they're like being like ultra endearing towards one another. I don't know.
You know what? If they want to be ultra endearing in that way, then that is good for them. I feel like, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Okay, but that's just my subjective
Yeah.
perspective. It's only my perspective.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm giving you is my subjective
Well,
perspective.
I guess it could also maybe differ from like, you know, person to person. Maybe, you know, one person does it because, you know, they have like serious, you know, daddy issues, and they think maybe that's the only way that you know, keeping positive male attention is to be small and young and cute, maybe, or something.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
then, but what does that say then about arrested development? That's
Yeah.
one remains daddy's girl, arrested, too young for I don't know how many years. And why would you want to do that? And if that is the way that you gain someone's attention, do you think you're flawed? Do you think you're not good enough? Can you not be the strength of yourself and also be needy, be dependent in a healthy way? Respect yourself. If you want to talk baby talk, okay. You want to diminish yourself
Yeah.
and stay too young. I think that's kind of the general piece of, do you want to diminish yourself and stay too young? Unfortunately, I think it still happens that too many females learn to be too young and to
Yeah.
yeah, they get rewards for not being as strong as they are. I don't think it's as much as it used to be. I just think it's too much there still.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think if you even just sort of look at, the mm, men's sort of male sexuality, I think, it seems that, perhaps they're more attracted to younger females. Like it's like younger is more valued, perhaps like from, maybe from an evolutionary perspective, it's because they're more fertile or something like this. But there does seem to be like a higher kind of value sexually anyway for like young women than like very strong women, or something. So
Yes,
maybe that's something.
but I do think you're right there, sadly. And so then, what is behind that? Is that how people are culturally acculturated, you could say? Is it what they learned in their family? Is it what they learned in the locker room? And why would they want to perpetuate that? As well as the whole issue of beauty, and that the woman can be beautiful throughout her entire life. I have a chapter on narcissism, which relates to, Narcissus fell into the pool because no one was more gorgeous than he, but Narcissus was 16 years old or so. So it's that kind of, I'm in love with youth. It's very Western, that that's all that's beautiful. And so I think that all people get short shrift when beauty is put into a box, and the beauty of a person throughout life is not acknowledged. And you could almost
Yeah,
say,
I don't know. I feel like if you look at it the other way,
yeah,
well, this is just my perspective. I don't know. I've never done a survey on this or something, but I feel like male beauty is valued more as they get older. So like, you know, I don't, that's just my opinion. It's like it seems like the value of a female's beauty gets, less with age, but men can still kind of uphold it, somehow. And then that sort of makes me think that, perhaps it's an evolutionary thing that, humans are just kind of, well, men are kind of like more programmed to value younger females, perhaps because they're, typically more fertile or something like this. I don't
but
know.
I think you might be right in a biological way. I think that's true. But I also think that women will say, I'm such and such an age, and I won't be able to find someone.
Yeah,
They want
that's very
somebody
sad.
that they want somebody younger. The
Yeah.
problem then also is, what do men learn to expect? Why wouldn't they expect to want to be somebody with someone who is, I don't know, maybe even older than them? Why can't we turn things around? What are we stuck in? So we all get limited by the culture we grow up in, the time we grow up in. The question is, can we let ourselves be free to find who we want, not based on the um, age markers on the apps, most of which are lied about. So,
Yeah.
and probably because of what you're saying, I think the sadness, though, again, is how many people get stuck in a number rather than the quality of somebody.
Yeah. And then, so there's the childish one, but then there's another kind of, this is one that I kind of see a lot with people I know. It's like women who try to have relationships with men. And you also mentioned in your book, I think there was like, it was like Kaylee. She's like, although
Yes.
she like longs for, you know, intimacy, she can't handle it, or she can't find it, or something like that. I was like, I see that kind of pattern a lot with some, you know, people I know, where it's like they'll get with a guy and they really want intimacy, but they'll get with a guy and they'll be like, you know, head over heels about them for like, I don't know, a couple of weeks or something. And then after some time, it's like when the intimacy kind of starts to develop, they almost like become disgusted with the other person and feel like, you know, really, yeah, just suddenly totally turned off. Like, is that also something that you see? And then also, how would you approach fixing that? Like, yeah,
That's fixed over time. The example of the person that I used in the book was somebody who quite sadly had a rather abandoning father, a distant father, and also a disappointing father, even sometimes brutal. So, what happens in any of those situations, and many, is that the daughter, the woman, learns to choose the wrong ones, the ones it will never work out with. Or even if they're right, whatever that means, she can't get close because she's expecting, this is automatic, it happens unconsciously. She's expecting the same kind of behavior that happened when she was growing up with her father. It's a weird thing that occurs. Is it the expectation that brings that about? Is it the familiarity that brings that about? Or is it that there's no trust and a discomfort with closeness that brings it about? How it gets healed or dealt with or understood is over time, looking at oneself, exploring together. I mean in analysis, and really looking into what does it really feel like when you get close to somebody, because she had a great deal of difficulty getting close. And
yeah,
that's really the issue, is if you don't learn closeness, we'll say with the father, how do you learn it? I mean, there might be a relative, etc., who takes that role, but it really is important to gain the security of being with someone you can trust so that you can develop relationships. Once again, I would say, even if you don't have that experience, a lot of people can develop it with a teacher, uh, somebody else down the street, and also it even develops in analysis. And in analysis, not with a man, in analysis with a woman, because the dynamics can be there anyway. So in the whole inner work, you figure out what's obstructing, what's getting in the way, and what do I need, and how can I open myself to what I'm afraid of? Because it's scary if you haven't had good experiences.
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna pass that advice on.
Okay, all
But
right.
so I know like this isn't really what your book is about, but it's like kind of, so you sort of focus on the, you know, the father-daughter relationship, but I'm also kind of curious to hear your thoughts about how, like, say, a daughter's relationship with her mother, or even a son's relationship with their mother, how is that dynamic similar, and how is it different, and like in what ways can that, you know, affect people in life?
Well, you're right. I write just a bit about the mother and the daughter, but the mother figure is very important as well. So you could say, on a real physical level, the daughter has a similar body to the mother. So there's in that very physical way, she can look at the mother and say, is this me? Do I want to be like her? She also picks up from the mother, as I mentioned earlier, the mother's feeling about the father or whoever her partner is. And that, whether it's said or not said, and oftentimes the nonverbal messages are the ones that are amazingly powerful. So that she gets a message about men, about the father figure from the mother, how the mother lives her life, how she respects herself, how she takes care of herself, how she regards her daughter is very important. So um, it's going to be different depending on each family, depending on the culture. And I think, again, that mothers are working more, so they're involved differently, but they have such a strong body effect because, we're all born from living in mother for 9 months. So that's true for sons as well.
Yeah.
Sons equally have. So some, it depends on the tie, depends on so many things. See, the psyche depends on so many different things, layer after layer after layer. It's amazing and wonderful and complex as well. Sons and daughters can be so tied to the mother they can't separate, or
Yeah.
so, yeah, or so distant they can't find themselves. So it's a very parallel story with the father, but because the father has a different role and a different role in each culture, so does the mother figure. That also figures in, also in the family, also in how they were treated by their mothers and fathers, and how they learned to mother their children or father their children is also very significant. So your question has opened a huge
Yeah,
area.
there's a lot of different sort of parallels that can
Totally, totally. And again, I would say I haven't covered all of the father because you can't do it, and that's okay. It's all right. You can't cover it
yeah.
because for everyone to explore and figure out for themselves how they can have the best life that they can, no matter what has happened to them.
Yeah. You also wrote another book, right before The Absent Father Effect.
Yes, I wrote a book with Susan Scott on aging and becoming, and
Ah,
I wrote a book with Daniela Roher on couples at the crossroads. So there were two before. Yes. What we did, I'll do this briefly. What we did was we took each letter of the alphabet and went through, that's how it got organized, and went through to describe the process of aging through each of the letters of the alphabet, what they meant.
hmm.
So, like H is for hair, and how that her perspective and also my perspective. And that's how we did it. So, we brought in two different views, and the title of Aging and Becoming was meant to say aging is part of life and it's a process of becoming. You don't just stay static, you keep moving and you keep growing. You could say all the way through the alphabet and then start it all over again. And I really think that that's true psychologically of everything. You keep going, and that gives life, and life creates, and so we keep on developing. So that's kind of a small kernel of that.
Yeah, summary. And
Yeah.
what about couples at the crossroads? Is that like couples in conflict with each other?
That
Or
no, well, it's a conflict, but it's actually couples who come to a crossroads. Now, crossroads are normal in every relationship. It's how people negotiate them. How do they learn to talk to each other? How do they learn to communicate? How do they learn to deal with difficult emotions? How are they able to establish other means of communication than they've already got? And usually, well, in a couple relationship, we replicate what we had in our family. The mother and the father and the siblings, they all come into our intimate couple relationship. How are we going to deal with them? How are we going to deal with them differently? So that's what that is about. But it is to also honor the crossroads and use the crossroads, not necessarily to split and not necessarily to stay together, but to see, what does this mean? We've come to a fork in the road, and shall we continue and do it differently? Shall we not? Because there's going to have to be a difference that will occur. The Absent Father Effect on Daughter's Father Desire, Father Wounds is published by Routledge, and they're all available on Amazon.
Nice.
And yeah, and the Father Effect one is also available on Karnak and lots of other book sites. So they're easily accessible.
Nice. Well,
And I have some sample pages on my website, which is SusanSchwartzPhD.com.
nice. Well, I can't speak for the other two books, but I would definitely recommend for people to read The Absent Father Effect. It's really well written and very, very deep and insightful. Took me also on a journey, at the beginning I was like, but I have a good father. But then I started to kind of think of it also in a larger context. And yeah, it really was food for thought. So yeah, I'm really glad I read it as well.
Thank you. Because the point is to go from the beginning, what you thought, to the end, that your thought and your feeling is expanded.